Hello all, and welcome back to the Tempest. Please excuse the audio. We're doing this in a different place than normal. We are actually we're recording this episode in Moscow. We are visiting the Kremlin to collect our checks for like election disruption.
Yes, for spreading misinformation about the Joe Biden campaign and reporting accurately on the position Joe Biden has held his entire life,
Yep.
which, as you know, is playing right into Putin's hands, folks.
Sowing discord in the American population.
Yes, yes.
It's what we get paid to do. That's why I'm incredibly wealthy.
Yes, yes.
The Russians have deep pockets.
I am, the richest working class person in America because I accurately describe things that Joe Biden says and believes in.
Yeah.
And that, of course, as you know, just helps Trump get reelected, right?
Mm-hmm. All right.
Well, in all seriousness, this is The Tempest. I'm Sam.
And I'm Jack.
We are back at it again, coming off our last episode in which we eagerly discussed the potential death of the president, which, as the time of recording, has not happened.
Yeah, it's looking less likely by the day. Disregard our conclusions. Things are just back to normal now.
Well, that was just fun speculation. It was fun talking about a future where he's dead. That was, we had a good time.
Yeah, that's true. Heat of the moment.
Yeah. This is kind of a housekeeping episode, and that has the potential to be very interesting. Maybe not a funny one, but certainly one where you'll walk away learning something, we hope. Basically, right now, if you're following the election and you are a sentient person, you are thinking Joe Biden is going to win. Is that a fair statement to make?
Yeah, I think that seeing him with a 14-point lead in some polls is a clear indicator that he probably has the upper hand in this election.
Yes, he was leading, and to be fair, he's leading by numbers Hillary Clinton never led by.
Yeah, he's leading by numbers that Obama never led by.
Yes. So I think it's fair to predict the polls were wrong in 2016, but I don't think I've embraced the since for that the mindset that polls are always wrong and you can never trust polls.
Mm-hmm. No.
And I think individual state-by-state polls matter a great deal, and if half of them are true, Trump is pretty much mathematically locked out of winning the Electoral College.
Yeah, as someone that dabbles in statistics, I can say pretty safely most of these reported poll numbers are beyond the margin of error.
Yes.
I can say with greater than 95% certainty that Joe Biden will win a lot of these states that they're projecting.
Unless Trump steals it.
But
that can happen.
That is a possibility, but
it would be the second time in the 21st century that that's happened, so it's really not that shocking to think of.
Yeah, you're really not wrong on that one.
All right. Well, so we're looking at a President Biden in the coming months, and that we're imagining a post-Trump America, which no one has really thought of. But again, this episode is really about a specific aspect of the Biden campaign that I think is going to be a very important political phenomenon, assuming he wins. I think it'll arguably be one of the most important developments and one of the lasting impacts of the 2020 election. And Jack, what am I referring to?
You are referring to the Lincoln Project.
I am talking about the Lincoln Project and the exodus of the neoconservatives from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party.
Or at least to Joe Biden.
Yes. All right. We'll get into that later. But yes, we're talking about all of the Republicans or people who we associated with Republicanism until 2016 that are now shilling hard for Uncle Joe.
Mm-hmm.
And why don't you elaborate on, for our viewers that might not know, what is the Lincoln Project and why is it important?
So the Lincoln Project really, can't think of when it started, but it was half a year ago.
Hey, I thought it became famous right before the conventions.
It became very big before the conventions. But what it essentially is it's a group of former Republican operatives. The big one is George Conway, husband of Kellyanne Conway.
Yes.
And it's a lot of these ex GOP never Trumpers, and they're all reasonably like they're very in tune with like the media. There were advertisers. They put together like election things and like organized elections and that sort of thing. But they could not bear to support Donald Trump as the Republican candidate, so they've sort of traversed party lines and they're backing Joe Biden, and it's been a very big deal that they keep spitting out these like new advertising campaigns, all of these videos that make the rounds on Twitter, racking up millions of views at a time, and they spit these out like nothing. It's every day there's a new video. It's every time Trump so much as like gives an interview, they're taking the like recording and editing it into these videos and putting it out within hours. It's actually an incredible media machine they have going there, and that's even true of the Biden campaign. But what makes them so significant is the fact that these are not necessarily liberals or people that ever would have liked Joe Biden in the past. This is an alliance exclusively out of the convenience that they do not support Donald Trump in his mode of like sort of uncouth rhetoric that they find reprehensible.
Yes, they are putting aside party interests and for what they think is best for the country, and they think that what's best for the country is getting Trump out of office and electing Joe Biden president. And I think that's a very important development. I think because you have these people who spent 8 years really hammering away at Obama, and everything the Obama administration did, they would obsess over and hate on. And these most of them worked for the McCain and Romney campaigns. So like Steve Schmidt, he was played by Woody Harrelson in that HBO movie about Sarah Palin and the 2008 campaign, which was one of the few good political movies out there. And yeah, so these are all people that worked to elect Republicans in Congress and the Senate and tried to defeat Obama in 2008 and 2012. So, and the Democratic Party has really pretty much opened the door for them. The Lincoln Project is big on Twitter, and they reply to pretty much every single one of Trump's tweets with something to the effect of "Sir, how dare you, sir?" That they're the big Trump reply guys, and they just make ads. Really, I don't know if they're big on TV because I don't watch TV, but they're very big on Twitter and YouTube.
I mean, the thing that I think is especially interesting about them that gets overlooked sometimes is their main focus is Donald Trump, but if you go onto their Twitter, you can also see them making jabs at Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell.
Yes,
they want to cut out the roots of this like sort of conservative populist movement in America.
Yes, they are going after what they see as Trump's enablers in the Senate, which is very shocking because sort of like
it's the people they elected.
Yes, the Mitch McConnell Senate apparatus was created under the Obama years in 2014, well before Trump was even running for president. So these people essentially built the political machine that they're now running against pretty hardcore.
Yeah.
And I think to talk about we're going to come back to Lincoln Project at the end of the pod, but to talk about the Lincoln Project, you really have to talk about neoconservatism. What is a neocon? Who are the neocons? And what is that? So I did a little bit of a history research. I did a little research project for this episode.
You did.
Because they're sort of like an obsession of mine almost. They are, I argue, the most important people in American politics, especially now. Everything we're living in is a result of neocons in power. So we need to, if we want to change things, we need to understand who they are, what they do, and why we need to fight them. So let's get right into it. Are you ready?
I am, yeah.
All right, buckle up, kids. This is a quick history lesson from Sam Collington. Okay, if you Google search neoconservative, you're going to get a political ideology that emphasizes free markets and interventionist foreign policy. Wait a second, Sam. Isn't that just what a neoliberal is? Well, no. The main difference between neocons and neolibs are social policies. Neoconservatives are more likely to be pro-life, anti-gay marriage. These are bread and butter Republican Party issues. But what's important about the neocons is they didn't always used to be Republicans. The neocons are got started in the 1960s, and they were all Democrats. But what happened? Why did they stop being Democrats?
Well, I think we know some certain social changes that may have occurred around that time that could have swung them to another party.
Yes, definitely. Well, to an extent, yes. Like neocons, they didn't have a unifying opinion on civil rights. For example, Donald Rumsfeld, when he was elected to Congress in like 1966, his two main platforms were I'm pro civil rights and I'm pro Vietnam War. And Donald Rumsfeld is probably the most important neocon. I'll definitely be coming back and forth on him.
Mm-hmm.
But really, it's 1972. 1972, the Democratic Party nominates George McGovern, and George McGovern is sort of like the Bernie Sanders of that time period because he's hated by the Democratic establishment, and they're really pissed off that he won. I think if Bernie won the nomination, he would have gotten a lot of the same treatment. Not necessarily the same because Trump is hated way more than Nixon was, but you basically had like Democrats for Nixon in 1972 because they hated George McGovern that much.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you really start to see this big shift of all these people who were Democrats since the New Deal jumping ship and going over to the Republican Party and being huge Nixon supporters. And all these people like that Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, these are the most famous neocons, really. And they get their start in the Ford administration. They were constantly feuding during the Nixon years with Henry Kissinger.
Yep.
And if you want to understand foreign policy in America, it all leads back to Kissinger. Is that a fair statement to make?
Oh, just let me get this off the shelf. You guys can't see it, but you can hear it. That is Henry Kissinger's diplomacy.
Yes.
Got the copy right here.
In terms of like political, he's the most important political scientist when it comes to foreign relations from the Americans' perspective. Definitely, for sure. And the Nixon administration was really defined by him fighting with these younger, like, New Age conservatives which is weird because they kind of have a lot in common. I'd say the biggest thing they have in common, Kissinger, to sort of realpolitik and neoconservatism, is this naked, unabashed support of American empire at all costs.
Mm-hmm.
Unapologetic, pro, do whatever it's got to take to keep those markets open, baby.
Yeah, it's marked by the whole policy of foreign intervention, but I think especially now what we see is regime change. It's regime change policy that is the marking of neoconservative policy in America.
Yes, invading a country, or maybe CIA subversion if they can afford to do that. Mm-hmm. Replacing the government with something that is pro-America and pro-United States. And we'll be coming to the Iraq War very shortly. So, Nixon gets impeached, or resigns, sorry. Watergate happens, he's gone. Gerald Ford takes over. And the neocons under Ford are able to win, and they kick Kissinger out. Kissinger loses all of his power and influence, and Donald Rumsfeld becomes the youngest Secretary of Defense in U.S. history. Dick Cheney becomes White House Chief of Staff, and they basically have the keys to the castle, so to speak.
Yeah, that's the turning point.
Yes, they are. They have defeated Kissingerism. They have defeated the realpolitik, and they are running the show for Republican foreign policy. But as we all know, Jimmy Carter won in 1976. And all those guys, they were in power for 2 years, and they're out. The Ford administration was just a weird blurb in American history.
Yeah.
Or was it?
I don't think it was. Okay. I get a feeling these guys come back at some point.
Yes. So 1980. It's actually funny. I'm only bringing up 1980 because the Republican primary was George Bush Sr. versus Ronald Reagan. And George Bush Sr. won the Iowa caucus, and I think he won the New Hampshire primary, but Reagan makes a big comeback in South Carolina. I wonder why. And becomes the nominee. And the neocons then were saying, oh, this Reagan guy is a huge dumbass. He's a total rube. In fact, they were talking about him the same way they were talking about Donald Trump.
Wait a minute. Is Joe Biden our Ronald Reagan?
Maybe. I guess we'll find out if he wins.
Who's to say?
Yeah, because they're what? Because they're both senile and like
Yeah.
really stupid, confusing the plots of confusing movie plots with United States foreign policy. Yeah. So Ronald Reagan, they don't like him, but they sure as heck are gonna accept jobs from him, and they start to find a way in. They get their foot in the door in the Reagan administration. For example, Donald Rumsfeld is made special envoy to Iraq during the Iran-Iraq war, and there's a very famous picture of him shaking hands with Saddam Hussein, and it's sort of like a big deal because of what happens next. And then George Bush Sr. wins. Dick Cheney becomes his Secretary of Defense. Donald Rumsfeld goes in the private sector, so he kind of goes away for a little bit. H.W. Bush, as you know, his big thing was the first Gulf War. The first time we went to war with Iraq to protect the oil reserves in Kuwait.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lots of, devastation done to the Iraqi people, like the Highway of Death, for example. We bombed a highway full of fleeing civilians. But that's about it. It's a very mild war. It's over in like a few days. And everybody's like, oh, well, George Bush's war was so successful, he's unbeatable in 1992, right?
Yeah.
Well, no, he loses that election. And then we come to 2000, and what happened in the year 2000?
The Supreme Court decided the election.
Yes. George Bush Jr. gets elected by a very obvious fake Supreme Court mandate, and his vice president is none other than Dick Cheney, and he makes Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. So Donald Rumsfeld, I think Jim Mattis was the oldest, but before Jim Mattis, Rumsfeld was the youngest and oldest Secretary of Defense in U.S. history. I think that's just a fun fact. And anyway, people always associate like the Iraq War with Cheney, with good reason. Cheney was a big deal with that, but really the true architect of that war was the Bush Defense Department. It was Donald Rumsfeld and his right-hand man, Paul Wolfowitz.
You say Wolfowitz was the big...
Yes, Paul Wolfowitz
push.
is another big neocon bureaucrat. He was like, second in command to Rumsfeld in the beginning of the administration, and they both slowly got more power, especially when Colin Powell was out of the administration.
Yep. And
they sort of took over the George Bush administration, because if you remember, George Bush campaigned on a very humble foreign policy. But that's not exactly how things panned out. Iraq was their big pet project. Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, the architects of the Iraq War, really. And it's this, big disaster, I would say. It's one of the worst.
I think in hindsight, we can say, in fact, the Iraq War was a disaster.
It was one of the greatest, human rights violations since World War II.
Yeah, recent history, yeah.
Total devastation upon the region. It created ISIS. It did all these unspeakable cruelties to the Iraqi population. A generation of soldiers coming back home, all, messed up. And it was this big, unwinnable war. But neocons hate winning wars, right?
Yeah.
They like to stay there forever. They don't want to win the war. They don't want to come home from Afghanistan. They would have been fine with... That's what John McCain was campaigning on in 2008. He said, if we have to stay in Iraq for 100 years, we will.
Yeah, you can't send them home. We need to send more.
Yeah, exactly. You need to continue the occupation by any means. You need to, And towards the end of the Bush years, they were really floating war with Iran. Iran has always been the number one target of the neocons.
I mean, if we want to talk about neocons and see where Iran fits into this, just look at John Bolton.
Yes.
He was the premier embodiment of the neoconservative movement, especially when he was in the Bush administration. We see him join the Trump administration. That's where we see the big shift in the Republican Party. Trump would not go to war with Iran, and then you see Bolton leave.
Yep.
It's that simple. It is literally that simple. that he wanted regime change, he couldn't have it, and so he left.
Yes, and now he writes books attacking Trump, and so we kind of see where the neocon movement ended up. Sort of like, obviously, the election of Obama was a huge FU to the neocons because American people were like rightly fed up with just the mishandling of the economy and the disastrous foreign policy wars.
You can see the foreign policy dial shift from. I mean, early Obama administrations still stayed a lot with that regime change policy, especially when you look at Libya.
Yes, Libya, textbook example.
But I do give Obama credit for second-term international relations policy with, like, the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, and, like, Paris Climate Accord, where he does take this turn more towards neoliberalism, which is more concerned with, like, peace treaties. Same with, like, the and Trans-Pacific
not unilateralism. Yes.
Yeah, it's very multilateral coalition. That sort of foreign policy. Which,
yeah, even Libya was NATO.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. They neocons. They have no qualms with like not getting permission from the UN. They didn't lose any sleep over the Iraq War not really being popular in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
And but Obama's very different. Obama is very interested in collaboration. That's why Libya, the intervention in Libya, was done by the Obama administration, but it was really done in tandem with NATO. And it was NATO's first big project post-Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of proof that NATO shouldn't exist anymore, because there's no reason to have NATO, because there's no more Soviet Union. And they really shit the bed on Libya, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, Libya was a disaster.
It was once, this not a great place, but now it's a slave state. It's a place where slavery is legal, and it wasn't before 2011 when Gaddafi was removed. And neocons are always, again, Iran is their number one target, but now, lately, they've still been, floating the whole Syria thing and going in and taking out Bashar al-Assad.
Yep. Because that was the memo or whatnot that was released. Trump was considering going after Assad.
Yes, he thought about assassinating Bashar al-Assad in 2017.
Which
apparently.
I should note that was it the Ford administration that passed the legislation saying, as the United States, we will not assassinate world leaders?
I'm pretty sure it was. Yes, it was decided in that time. I don't know if Ford did it, but
it was around that time that the United States said, "Okay, we will not kill the leader of your country. We will not go in and execute your leader."
Well, we won't assassinate him. If we go to war with you and we kill him that way, that's okay.
Yes, but we will not go into your country in the middle of the night and execute your leader.
Yeah.
I mean, we can think about the U.S. doing that in the context of Syria, but on the international stage, that'd be basically like the U.S. going into, France and executing Emmanuel Macron.
Yeah, like sneaking into his room or, sniping him or something.
Yeah, While in the context of Syria, you may argue, that's okay, we don't like Assad, or he's violating human rights. You could make those arguments and present them as, this is why we should kill him. But within the context of international law, that would be the equivalence of murdering Emmanuel Macron.
Yeah, yes. It, and to be clear, this is a pro-Assad podcast. What's wrong?
You do you.
Okay, anyway.
The podcast doesn't take any official stance on Bashar al-Assad. The opinions of the hosts are the opinions of the host alone.
Okay, but all right. I want to get neoconservatism. I think there's important things to bring up in its history, and that is its association with Leon Trotsky.
Go on.
Yes, not a lot of people know this, but there is this sort of phenomenon in political ideology. It's called the Trotskyist to neocon pipeline. And a lot of these guys, these people became not the neocon politicians. Dick Cheney was never a fan of Trotskyism or communism or socialism. But a lot of the leaders of the think tanks, like one Irving Kristol, who was the father of Bill Kristol. Bill Kristol, if there's anyone who's directly responsible for getting the media on board with the Iraq War, it's him. Because all his job was dumping billions of dollars into essentially propaganda about why the Iraq War is good and cool, and that's why every newspaper got behind it, and if you questioned it at all, you were labeled like practically
You're
traitorous.
anti-American.
Yeah, yes. So Bill Kristol really he's the architect of the media campaign around the war, so he's very an important figure, and that neoconservatives have always tried to have like media access to the media, like any political movement or lobbying group or whatever. But Irving Kristol is the father of neoconservatism in a lot of ways, as like a political ideology. He
And literally.
yes, he's like written books about it, and he's sort of like their go-to philosopher, I guess you could say, the same way. If you're a socialist, you're gonna say Marx is your the father of your ideology, for lack of a better phrasing. But he, in the 1950s or whatever, he identified as a Trotskyist. And he was like, yeah, everybody was into Trotsky. And sort of like its ties to like the anti-Stalinist left, all the leftists who all the communists, I should say, all the socialists who didn't like Stalin, fell into under like a Trotskyist banner, and like pretty much every New York leftist in the 1960s, for whatever reason, was a Trotskyist, and they become neocons, and a lot of academia has tried. Well, the few academic people that actually bother touching on this, because it's kind of like a weird, like you don't get more obscure than, not obscure, but like less relevant to American or like politics as a world phenomenon than Trotskyism. Like Trotskyism has made no contributions to like meaningful. I don't even hate the guy. Like a lot of people, it's really popular for socialists to hate Trotsky. I definitely don't hate him, but
I kind of like him.
yeah, he's okay. It's weird, like the whole Marxist. I get Stalin versus Trotsky is its whole other thing, but let's not forget they were just two guys who had disagreements at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, I have respect for Trotsky and his outlook on socialism.
I have a lot of respect for him because he was, if there ever was a true believer in communism, it was definitely him. Mm-hmm. He and I guess in a way he's kind of a martyr. But anyway, it hasn't really made a lot of big impacts on the world since like 1917.
No, most of his contributions have come in his like histories, his writings of like the happenings of the Russian Revolution, that sort of thing.
Yeah, sure. But anyway, basically, if you didn't like Stalin and you were a communist, you were probably a Trotskyist in the 1960s anyway, and they sort of became disillusioned with the new left and drifted towards liberalism, which is giving like tankies like a very excited thing. It's like, see, all the leftists we don't like are liberals. And like neoconservatism is sort of like a lot like Trotskyism, because obviously it has nothing to do with socialism, but permanent revolution for liberalism. And that was Trotsky's big thing, is permanent revolution, and bring the revolution to the rest of the world. And is that not sort of what we see neoconservatism wanting to do with liberalism, with free market capitalism and being pro-U.S.?
Yeah, it spread the democracy to the rest of the world.
Exactly. Instead of spreading communism to the rest of the world, which is what Trotskyism was rooted in, it's spreading liberalism to the rest of the world and doing it via the barrel of a gun.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, so that's sort of like our crash course on neoconservatism.
And where we're kind of leading for this to end up is returning to the Lincoln Project. That's who these guys are. They are leaving the Trump Republican Party. They're leaving this. I don't know. How would you describe the new Trump Republican ideology?
Well, that's the darndest thing, because Trump says one thing and does another. He is the most unpredictable person I've ever met. He has given these people everything they could have asked for. Neocons, they love the Supreme Court. So they're
all card-carrying Federalist members.
Yes, they simp for the Federalist Society, so he's giving them their Supreme Court. They love Israel. That's actually a thing that I forgot to get into, but anti-Semitism and neoconservatism is kind of a problem. There's a lot of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about, like, and neocons, that it's a Jewish cabal that just wants and I think we can get into their like conflict with the alt right. You'd probably be able to talk more about that than me. But what was I saying?
You were talking about the Lincoln Project.
Yeah. And yeah, I can't tell with Trump because they love Israel, and he gave them Jerusalem embassy.
Yeah.
That was a big deal for them. And he certainly hasn't been kind to Iran. He's assassinated the general. Like, that's the thing with Trump. I sort of think his foreign policy outlook is, I'm not going to start a war, and that's upsetting them. But Trump's totally fine with pressing the drone button that Obama built. He'd be like, "Oh, you want me to press this button right here and to blow up these guys down there? I'll do that all you want. That's not an issue."
Yeah.
But when he comes down to like committing ground troops and things like that, Trump won't do it because he remembers the political backlash of the Iraq War.
Exactly. It's the big binary between these neocons and, I hate to use the word, but like Trumpism, which I guess is all you really can call it at this point. But the big division between those two is regime change. It's the neocons are willing to put boots on the ground and overthrow Ayatollah Khomeini.
Or any type of government.
Or any government,
democratically
for that matter.
elected or otherwise.
Yeah. And like overthrow the regime if they don't like it. But Trump isn't willing to do that. He'll put sanctions on it. He'll just destroy it with sanctions. Same goes with Venezuela, actually, when you think about it. If we had like John Bolton still up there, if we had almost a Bush-esque government, I would not be surprised if we were seeing a lot more coup attempts in Venezuela. Because we saw the one earlier, but that was so absolutely failed.
Yes.
Incredibly embarrassing for America.
And Trump correctly identified Juan Guaido as a huge loser.
Yeah, no one, I don't want to say no one because I know people still do, but very few people still stand behind Juan Guaido because he has no claim. He has no legitimacy anymore. Like,
Juan Guaido just said, "I'm president of Venezuela," and, all the right-wingers were like, ooh. But Trump was like, I guess maybe they met, and Trump was like, "He's low energy, I can tell. He doesn't have it in him. He's not a winner. He's not like me." And but all these other guys were like simping for him, like, no, we can overthrow the Chavista government.
Brought him to the State of the Union. Who did
that? That was Trump, obviously.
Yeah.
But exactly.
But no, we don't see this like sort of concerted push to spread American-style liberal democracy to a lot of these countries the same way we would under a like Bush Jr. or especially a Bush Sr. government.
Yeah, it's the damnedest thing. Like, Trump, I don't want to confuse anybody. This might sound like an endorsement of him. It's not. Trump is detestable, everything about him, and his foreign policy is still just as malicious as all the other evil U.S. presidents have done to keep the empire afloat. Mm-hmm. He's not invading countries, but he's still putting crippling sanctions on there. COVID was made so much worse in Iran because of U.S. sanctions. They couldn't get medicine for their people because of crippling U.S. sanctions. When you cut the dollar off from people, you can do just as much damage as an army could in some cases. And he'll press the bomb and the drone button as many times as he wants. He is no way a dove, even though he campaigned on being anti-Iraq war. He is not a dove. He is not a kind-hearted, benevolent
He
emperor.
likes getting caught in this vortex of escalation, but unlike the neocons, he will never let it boil over.
Yes, that's the thing that I would say to his credit. He hasn't started a war. He hasn't invaded Iran. He hasn't, he talked about killing Assad, but he didn't have the guts or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so that's like, why do you think these people that are hightailing it out of the Republican Party and going to Biden is because they think that, because Biden has been making that pitch, kind of. He's been like, Trump has mismanaged the empire, and I'm going to fix that.
Yeah.
I'm going to get back to managing the empire.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's an interesting point to make and sort of like look at is the neocons have more in common with the neoliberals than they do with however we would choose to describe Trump's foreign policy.
Yes, and even though Trump is really just governed like a normal Republican, he has normalized rhetoric, I think, that's very populist in nature and very also anti-American. Like he's sometimes often criticized the American empire and like the Iraq War. He like used it against Jeb Bush in the primaries like a bad thing, and that was sort of like the first time a Republican president has distanced himself from the Iraq War.
We talked about it a while back, but the way Trump looks at it is the way a businessman looks at it. The same way he saw John Kelly's son's grave and thought, like, what was in it for him? He doesn't see any benefit from, like, pursuing these wars. He doesn't see any benefit to, like, pursuing a military campaign, a military career, any of that. His vision is limited to what is in it for me, and there's nothing in it for him in Iran.
Yeah, or an entangling war.
The policy of like sanctioning Iran is not so much an active one but a passive one. It is us willfully saying, like, we will not allow you to exist, but you're not worth our time invading.
Yeah.
It is the bare minimum, but also the most devastating thing you can do to a country and its like economy is cutting it off from the American dollar.
Yeah.
And that is
now.
what he has done.
Yep.
He isn't pursuing these like military campaigns because they're expensive. They take a toll on like public what the public thinks.
Yeah.
Nobody wants them. But the sanctions are so distant from the American people, their costs are so removed from us that is like the only solution he'll take, because he knows that what's in it for him, the benefits outweigh the cost on sanctions and these sort of like policies of limited escalation, where it wouldn't if he were to like follow through on sort of like neoconservative promise of regime change.
Yeah, it's like the most important thing that happened in the anti-war movement during the Vietnam era was after Nixon got elected saying he would end the war. He ended the ground war in a lot of ways, and he just continued dropping bombs. He didn't end the war by any stretch. He continued bombing countries, but it was literally bombs, and he was using helicopters and planes to fight the Vietnamese instead of ground troops, and that's when the protests stopped.
Yeah.
It became of no material consequence to these United States citizens because they weren't, like, literally dying. They were just spending lots of money, and, the American people don't really pay a lot of attention to where their tax dollars go to. It's all about material consequence, and there was no material consequence to drone somebody or to put crippling sanctions on them the way it is to send their sons off to die.
Exactly. And, I guess that brings us back to the Lincoln Project.
Certainly.
How does this relate to the Lincoln Project? Like, what made us think of this? Well, I think if we, like, look away from the foreign policy side and aim more at, like, the cultural aspect, I think we can see the biggest division between the Lincoln Project and the Biden campaign. And that's in the recent developments with the Supreme Court. So we all know what's going on with the Supreme Court.
No need to relitigate it.
Yes, Sam. The replacement for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Amy Coney Barrett. Now, if you look at the Biden campaign, he is coming down hard on this issue. He is hammering this in. This is his big issue of we cannot replace a justice right now. We need to leave the Supreme Court open. It's what's right. Now look at the Lincoln Project, on the other hand.
All these former Republican operatives that were simping for Biden a week ago.
What is theoretically one of the more significant swing issues for voters, like below coronavirus by like a little bit, but what is incredibly significant to voters. They're not touching this issue.
Yeah,
Conway, Gates, all of these guys, they don't want to address the Supreme Court. Now, why is that? Why is it that these conservative operatives would be perhaps unwilling to criticize the one or two Trump policies that are giving them exactly what they want?
Yes. And, you sort of exposed the crux of the issue. Their disagreements with Trump are purely aesthetic based. Mm-hmm. They are like creaming their jeans at the prospect of a 6-3 conservative Supreme Court. Yeah.
And if you look at it, even, you're coming after the senators that would vote. but Trump's going to push it in through before the election or in the lame duck session. They can get out Lindsey Graham. They can get out Mitch McConnell. They can do whatever they want. They do not care so long as this conservative justice can be pushed through before Biden takes office, before Biden can nominate probably Merrick Garland, before any of that can change, because what always comes first, despite how they present themselves, is their ideology. And as neoconservatives, the social issues are something they need to win to maintain their sort of political standing. To maintain the base, they need the social issues. I mean, you look at various conservatives in the Senate. How many of them present as libertarians? How many of them say, "Oh, I am a libertarian. I'm a civil libertarian. I believe in
2 or 3. I really say the only big one that's consistent is Rand Paul.
Yes, but how many of them actually present as it? Ted Cruz would call himself a libertarian.
Ted Cruz LARPs is one. Mike Lee LARPs is one.
Yeah. So when you come down on the issues of, say, gay marriage, abortion, Roe v. Wade, they do not turn. Now, I don't know if that's because they're God-fearing Christians and they believe that it's actually the right thing to do, or is it because they know that it's these culture war issues that keep people voting for them?
Yes. If you look at Republican Party platform, rich people pay no taxes and we go to war with Honduras, you'll find that those are wildly unpopular with not just Democratic voters, but Republican voters too.
And exactly. So what you're seeing is the Lincoln Project isn't so much abandoning their political platform, but what they're doing is they're adopting these sort of liberal social policies, this sort of veneer of libertarianism, essentially.
Yeah.
It's legitimate libertarianism on issues such as expunging records and all of that, but they're still going to try and push through a Supreme Court justice that will side with them on the corporate donor issues that actually matter to them, that matter on the issues of Obamacare. They want a justice that'll strike down Obamacare, strike down the Affordable Care Act. Not necessarily take out Roe v. Wade, but severely limit it. And that's sort of like the John Roberts thing, where you're not going to openly reject a lot of these things, but you're going to start to kneecap them, leave it to the states, leave the dirty work to the legislature, and by God, the legislature is happy to do that dirty work in a lot of places. But if you start to take this social tack, you can draw a lot more people now than if you stayed on the right.
Yeah.
And that's why they're siding with Biden.
Yeah. I'm on, I guess, the flip side of the issue. I think it's all material based. I'm a hard materialist. And I think these are just people that are part of the American ruling class, and they are aware that Trump paints an image of the American ruling class that enrages a lot of people. A lot of people who didn't care about politics see Trump, and they're disgusted by this loud, rich dunce who's never worked a day in his life, dodged the draft, coming in and saying he's King Patriot, and
yeah, he acts like nouveau riche. He's not part of the ruling class. He got his money from real estate. He's not part of the American gentry.
Yeah, well, they sort of shine a light. I think Trump shines a light on the American ruling class, and he admits things that they know but would never admit. I'm not going to war. You don't get anything from serving your country, and Biden would be a return to normalcy, quote unquote, where the American ruling class would be sort of respected again.
Yeah.
And there wouldn't really be this much obsession wait a second, what do you mean rich people don't pay taxes? Things would return to normal and they wouldn't be under the limelight so much the way Trump has forced them to be. And I think it would really be more false consciousness, and there would be a defeat of any potential, real class consciousness that might have possibly come from the Trump era of just seeing this, vulgar billionaire, destroy what little was left of democracy in this country.
Yeah, and I think when it comes down to it, both of us are right. They they have their reasons, and it makes it clear that you put your chips on Biden when you can, because whether or not, if you're a neocon, whether or not you like it, neoliberalism will be the future of your policy. There's no more military supremacy in a globalizing world. It's economic, it's treaty, it's alliances, and you can't do the unilateral action the way you used to, so you got to push the empire the way Biden and Obama did, and you can't.
Yes, you got to be subtle about the empire now.
Exactly.
And I think they are coming to grips with that, and they're willing to accept it to hold on to power. And you're going to notice a lot of, because you're right. At the end of the day, no one goes to sanctions protests. Like, no one, like, the people that would otherwise turn out to an anti-war rally don't go to anti-sanction. I went to protests against Venezuela, and, the only people there were socialists. Liberals don't care about these things because, it's not to say that they're dumb. It's just that there's no reason to pay attention
people
to
are
it.
starving. That's socialism. It has nothing to do with the fact that no one can bring stuff into the country.
No. It's like you have no reason to pay attention to it, and it's easy not to. And there's enough distractions in the world that are created to keep you from paying attention to it.
Yeah. So in conclusion, we pay no attention to the sanctions behind the curtain.
Let me put it to you this way. There is no way in hell the Lincoln Project would exist if Bernie Sanders became the Democratic Party nominee.
Absolutely not. You know how hard they would be hammering that Trump message in? They would be saying, we need Trump again.
Yes. Because you remember 2016, none of these guys endorsed Hillary Clinton. They nominated their own shitty candidate, the guy, the Utah, the Mormon freak.
Which is funny because Clinton is more of a neocon than Biden.
I guess. I think they're kind of this. I don't know. I don't see any difference between the two of them.
Hillary the hawk, Biden the dove.
Is Biden the dove? Show me where Biden the dove. And also, to get, you mentioned the Supreme Court, I would say this would briefly be worth talking about. My take on the Supreme Court is that they're not going to... The only reason they wouldn't, give Trump the election was because for the same reason the Lincoln Project wants Biden to win. They don't want any more attention brought to them. The Supreme Court has been a pretty reliable... the criminal Supreme Court has been a pretty reliable point man for capital in a lot of ways. And all of the gains that were made by workers since the New Deal in the early 20th century, and all the political reform that we've made to make this country, more of a democracy,
has been gains in the 60s.
Yes, has been chipped away at and destroyed. And nobody really knows. People don't talk about Citizens United anymore.
No.
Yeah, and so that's why they're not going to overturn really popular, really important cases like Obergefell v. Hodge, which legalized same-sex marriage, or Roe v. Wade, because they don't want to discredit themselves as an institution, and that's why I could see them theoretically not giving the election to Trump, because they know if they did that, they would be a lightning rod for all these criticisms, and liberals love the Supreme Court, and they love talking about it, and they are very into it. And they would sort of start to see it as a bad institution, and they don't want to do that.
Yeah, Roberts would hate that.
I think that's the Senate is starting to turn that way. I think McConnell has started to turn. People are like, what is up with the Senate? Why is the Senate so terrible? Why, people are starting to notice, how is it fair that states like Vermont have the same senators as California? Which
I was going to say Oklahoma, but
no, Vermont and Wyoming. There's 40 million people living in California, and it's
and there's 700,000 of us in the Green Mountain State.
Yeah, and people are starting to notice things like that, and they're starting to be like, why is the Senate so reactionary? And
no, it'll be better if we had D.C. and Puerto Rico. That's all we need. That'll make things better. But, yeah, I think that wraps us up.
Yeah, I feel like this episode will go either way.
Yeah.
It might be good, but people might like it, or they might be like, what is this, some stupid filler episode?
Yeah, let us know what you think of the episode. We are at Pod Save Your Soul on Twitter, The Tempest. Reach out, let us know topics you'd like us to cover in the future, anything you want to hear about, and eventually we'll have this up on SoundCloud. YouTube.
Yeah,
we're trying to expand to other platforms, but we'll keep you updated with that.
If you like the episode, Jack will get to go outside for the first time in 3 months. I will let him out of the cage.
Oh, that'll be very nice. All right. We'll be back next week.
Yeah, surely.